In this edition of the Red and Blue Political Roundup, Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker says special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation is close to ending.
I am comfortable that the decisions that were made are going to be reviewed, either through the various means we have. But right now, the investigation is, I think, close to being completed, and I hope that we can get the report from Director Mueller as soon as possible.
Whitaker's comments on the Mueller investigation were in response to a question from our Paula Reed and came after a press conference announcing criminal charges related to the Chinese telecommunications company Huawei. They mark the first time any Justice Department official has suggested that the Mueller investigation is wrapping up. Joining me now from Washington is Hunter Walker. He's a White House correspondent for Yahoo News. Hunter, thanks for joining us. Any reaction from the White House on that news from Acting Attorney General Whitaker? And is there a sense that could be a good thing for the president, or is there a sense maybe that could be a bad thing for the president?
Well, we saw this very rare White House briefing today. It was Sarah Sanders' first time behind the podium in about 41 days. And there were a ton of questions about the Russia probe and, this incredible indictment of Roger Stone, who was one of the president's closest allies. And I think in general on all of this, it was something Sarah Sanders really wanted to avoid discussing. I mean, it was like the Matrix. She was just leaning every which way and right to just get past those questions. Yeah. So I mean, maybe you could consider that a reaction in and of itself, but there wasn't anyone I could really quote other than to say that they dodged the question. But I would just throw out there that, we've seen from a lot of Trump allies, Rudy Giuliani, Matt Whitaker, and others, this notion that the Mueller probe is almost wrapping up. And, some of the earlier predictions of that have already proved incorrect at this point. But also, Bob Mueller's going to get done when he's going to get done. And I certainly haven't seen or heard any indication that he's near finishing up. This investigation has gone on far less time than other special counsel probes. And I think he's on his own timetable, and he really only speaks through legal filings and indictments. And we'll see what he's done when he closes up his shop.
Right. And not surprisingly, there has been no comment from the special counsel on what the acting attorney general said. Let's turn to foreign policy. Early Monday, the White House announced sanctions on Venezuela's state-owned petroleum company and blamed President Nicolas Maduro for the country's humanitarian crisis. How big of a foreign policy test is this situation for the president?
Right. Well, there's basically two presidents in Venezuela right now. You have President Guaido, who's claimed victory in recent elections, and also President Maduro. And the White House is basically taking sides here. And Maduro and the, sort of the successor to Hugo Chavez, that regime has long been an enemy of the United States, particularly kind of a bogeyman among conservatives. So we're backing the opposition here. And this is a huge, huge, huge test. I mean, you saw the president's top national security advisor, John Bolton, come out for this briefing, and he confirmed that military options, all options are on the table here. So American lives are at stake in that sense, but they're also at stake because we have diplomatic personnel there. And Nicolas Maduro, after our recognition of his opponent, has said, he expelled the U.S. diplomats from the country. And we did have non-essential personnel and family members evacuate, but we do still have a presence there that's technically, going against the wishes of the current president. I guess you could. Right. Some would call him that. Right. So, there's those people are at risk. But in addition to the lives at stake here, I think this is really sort of an ideological test for President Trump, because this is someone who, ran on a campaign where he said he was opposed to the Iraq War from the beginning. There was no evidence of that necessarily, but he really did make a promise to his followers that we wouldn't get involved in these foreign conflicts. And you saw that continued when he talked about a withdrawal from Syria. And he hasn't really been able to execute that. And now in Venezuela, we're potentially looking at another foreign war. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how this shakes out.
Yeah, it will be, especially because, as you note, I mean, it just doesn't seem to comport with that America first sort of foreign policy position that the president staked out very early on. Well, meantime, the White House also announced a new round of trade talks with China scheduled for later this week. What are you watching for in those negotiations?
Well, Larry Kudlow also came out today. I mean, everybody was coming out at the White House.
Right.
And he's the president's top economic advisor. And he expressed cautious optimism that we would have a new trade deal here. I do think there's a little momentum on that front in that both the U.S. economy and the Chinese economy saw some effects of the looming trade war that we're risking here. There were slowdowns on both sides. So I think the U.S. and China, we do have incentive to make a deal all around here. So I think the question will be, are we just going to see what we've seen in the past where there are talks, there's sort of vague pronouncements and more talks are scheduled, or are we going to see the concrete framework of a deal start to emerge?
And looking in the near term here, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi invited President Trump to deliver the State of the Union on February 5th. That's next Tuesday. What can we expect to hear from the president?
Well, we averted the shutdown for now. We do have this temporary deal that will keep it at bay for, about 3 weeks here. And given that President Trump has said another shutdown is not off the table and, that we just came off the longest one in U.S. history, I think we're very much going to see him sort of do what he did in his recent Oval Office address, where he makes his shutdown case, which is essentially that he's demanding border wall funding from the Democrats and that any shutdown that happens as a result is due to them ignoring what he sees as a humanitarian crisis and emergency on the border. So I'm predicting, sort of a longer version of the president's pitch that Democrats are to blame for the shutdown and that he wants money for his border security.
Well, the State of the Union will fall about halfway through the 3-week continuing resolution passed to keep the government open. Where are we on a new spending deal, and how is the White House approaching new negotiations with lawmakers?
One thing that we've seen is senators on both sides are getting behind proposals that would permanently come up with a solution where we would avoid shutdowns going forward. I mean, for years now, we've been lurching from continuing resolution to potential shutdown to now real shutdown. And I think there's a lot of momentum to not just put a Band-Aid on this and come up with a solution once and for all. Of course, that doesn't deal with this short-term fight over border security funding. And you're seeing other members of Congress say, okay, this permanent solution does need to be paired with a short-term. One of my favorite things about this is one of these bills is called the Stop Stupidity Act. And it's, you've seen in Congress, they sometimes come up with inventive acronyms for these bills. And this is basically the gold medal winner in history for that. It's I pulled it up on my phone here. It's shutdowns transferring unnecessary pain and inflicting damage in the coming years. So they really have done a lot of work to come up with a creative acronym there, and maybe that level of work means they really do want to make this happen.
And perhaps they could focus some of that energy on actually getting something done. That would be great. All right, Hunter Walker, thank you so much, Hunter.
Thanks for having me.